He told her he didn't care, but 4 years later, in a crowded art museum, he froze as two boys with his blue eyes stared back at him. Evelyn had imagined 100 ways the conversation might unfold, but none of them prepared her for the brutal simplicity of the moment. She stood in the doorway of Matthew Colton's corner office, the entire city glittering behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, while inside the room everything felt suffocatingly small. The pregnancy test in her hand felt heavier than any object she had ever held, as if it carried not only the weight of her future but the weight of whatever remained between them. She waited for him to glance up, to notice the tremor in her breath, to sense that the news she brought would change both their lives. But Matthew didn't look at her. He didn't even turn his head. His brown hair fell forward slightly as he leaned over documents on his desk, his blue eyes scanning lines of numbers with cool precision, completely untouched by the storm rising inside her. For a moment, Evelyn convinced herself to speak. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "Matthew, we need to talk." He finally acknowledged her presence, though not in the way she desperately needed. He exhaled sharply, as if interrupted in the middle of something more important. "What now?" he asked, still not lifting his gaze. She took a step forward, clutching the test so tightly the plastic bent under her fingers. "I'm pregnant." The air stilled. She waited for the shift, some reaction, some flicker of emotion, anything to indicate he'd heard the magnitude of what she said. Instead, Matthew leaned back in his chair, closed a folder, and gave a quiet, dismissive laugh, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't care," he said flatly. No hesitation. No confusion. No humanity. 3 words that sliced through her like a blade. Evelyn felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to breathe. "How can you say that?" she whispered, stunned by his coldness. "This isn't just about me." "It's not about me either," he replied without pause. "You chose to bring this to my office. Handle it however you want." He still didn't look at her, didn't see the devastation blooming across her face, didn't see the color draining from her skin, didn't see the way his indifference rewrote every memory she had of him. She had known Matthew to be stern, reserved, disciplined to a fault, but never cruel. Not like this. Her heart felt too big for her chest, beating so hard she thought it might crack open. "Matthew," she tried again, her voice trembling despite her best effort to remain strong, "these are your children too." His jaw tightened, but his expression remained eerily calm. "Evelyn, I built a life without complications. I don't want them now. Make whatever decision you want, but don't involve me." The last thread holding her together snapped. She stared at him, at the man she had trusted, the man she had let close, the man she now realized she never fully knew. His blue eyes remained cold, detached, focused on anything but her. In that moment, she understood that staying would destroy her. So she turned. She didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't beg him to reconsider. She simply walked out of the office, feeling the world tilt beneath her feet. She didn't hear him call after her, because he didn't. She didn't feel a hand on her arm, because he never reached for her. The elevator doors closed around her, silent witnesses to the moment her life split in two, the part where she had believed in him, and the part where she knew she had to let that belief die. Outside, the city continued moving, unaware of the life growing inside her and the man who refused to claim it. As Evelyn pressed a hand to her stomach, she whispered a promise, one born from heartbreak and fierce determination. "You will be loved," she murmured to the unborn children. "Even if I have to do it alone." And somewhere far above her, in his perfect office with his perfect view, Matthew Colton returned to his paperwork, unaware that the next time he saw her, she would not be alone, and the sight of what he had walked away from would bring him to a standstill. Evelyn left the city the very night she walked out of Matthew's office, carrying nothing but a small suitcase, the envelope with her final paycheck, and the stubborn, trembling resolve that she and her unborn children deserved more than the indifference she had been shown. She boarded the late bus to her hometown, sitting by the window with her coat pulled tight around her, feeling the first waves of nausea and fear settle into her stomach. She tried not to think of Matthew's face, calm, unbothered, dismissive. But the echo of his voice clung to her like a stain. "I don't care," she repeated those words in her mind until they hardened into a shield, a reminder that whatever life she built from here on out, it would be forged by her alone. The months that followed were messy, bruising, and unexpectedly beautiful. Pregnancy arrived like a storm, battering her with exhaustion and cravings, and nights when she woke gasping from dreams of being abandoned in long, echoing hallways. But every time she felt the babies move, first as fluttering whispers, then as strong, insistent kicks, she felt something powerful unfurl within her. A quiet defiance. A fierce love. A determination so sharp it felt almost like rebirth. She attended appointments alone, her hands trembling as she signed forms that asked for a father's name she refused to fill in. She worked double shifts at a local bookstore cafe, shelving new releases with one hand while steadying her stomach with the other. People asked questions, polite, curious, intrusive, but she learned how to smile without answering. These children were hers. She didn't owe the world an explanation. When the twins were born, the delivery room filled with the sound of 2 newborn cries, loud enough to drown out every painful memory she carried. Lucas arrived first, fists clenched as though ready to fight the world. Owen followed minutes later, quieter but alert, his blue eyes scanning the unfamiliar lights above him. Evelyn held them both against her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered their names like a prayer. She felt the weight of them, warm, fragile, alive, and she knew instantly that no matter how difficult the road ahead would be, it was still the right one. They were perfect. They were hers. And for the first time since the day she discovered she was pregnant, she didn't feel alone. The next years blurred together in a rhythm of chaos and tenderness. She learned how to swaddle 2 babies at once, how to function on 3 hours of sleep, how to laugh when both boys began screaming for no reason except that the other was doing it. She learned to stretch every dollar, skipping meals so the twins never went without. Nights were the hardest, especially in the beginning. She would sit in the rocking chair between their cribs, humming softly to keep them calm, and those were the rare moments when thoughts of Matthew crept back into her mind. She wondered if he ever thought about her. About them. If he ever realized what he had rejected. But each time, she pushed the thought away like extinguishing a flame. His absence was a wound, yes, but it was also a gift, proof that he was not the man they deserved. As Lucas and Owen grew, their personalities blossomed in completely different directions. Lucas was bold and energetic, fearless to the point of recklessness, always climbing, running, exploring whatever space he was confined in. Owen was gentler, thoughtful, with a small furrow of concentration that appeared whenever he tried to understand the world around him. But they shared the same striking blue eyes, eyes that Evelyn learned to accept without flinching. For a long time, they had reminded her painfully of the man who didn't care. But over time, she realized the truth: those eyes were no longer Matthew's. They belonged to the boys who looked at her with pure trust and unconditional love, and that made them precious. When the twins turned 4, Evelyn found the job at the museum. It was a chance at stability she couldn't afford to ignore. The hallways were quiet, filled with soft lighting and gentle footsteps, a place where she could breathe even when life pressed too heavily on her chest. And the boys loved it, loved the colors, the strange sculptures, the winding halls that felt like secret passages. They would race between exhibits while she worked, always staying within sight, always laughing loudly enough for her to find them. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt something close to peace. She built a life out of ashes, out of heartbreak, out of determination so fierce she barely recognized herself anymore. A life with routines, stability, small joys. A life where her sons thrived and her heart slowly mended. And as she walked through the museum one quiet morning, watching Lucas explain a sculpture to Owen with wild hand gestures, she realized something that startled her with its clarity. She didn't miss Matthew. She didn't need him. Her world wasn't lacking anything. She didn't know that fate was already moving pieces into place. She didn't know that the man she had once loved, once feared she would never escape, was about to walk back into her life. And when he did, it would be in the one place she felt safest. The one place she thought he could never reach. A museum filled with art, and with the two children whose eyes would bring him to a standstill. The museum was unusually busy that afternoon, the kind of gentle chaos Evelyn had learned to navigate with ease. A new exhibition, an immersive collection of modern landscapes, had drawn families, tourists, and students into the gallery halls, filling the air with murmured conversations and soft footsteps echoing across marble floors. Sunlight streamed in through the high windows, illuminating the polished surfaces of sculptures and casting long shadows that made the space feel almost dreamlike. Evelyn stood near a vibrant abstract canvas, patiently guiding a small group of children through the concept of perspective. Lucas and Owen lingered beside her, each holding a small audio guide they weren't truly listening to, more interested in the colors swirling across the canvas than the explanation behind them. She kept a subtle eye on them while talking, her voice flowing smoothly, the comfort of routine steadying her after a morning of spilled juice, mismatched socks, and Lucas trying to convince Owen that he could definitely outrun a dinosaur if one ever escaped a museum. When the group dispersed, Evelyn crouched to wipe a smudge of green paint off Owen's cheek, a remnant from the children's station they had passed earlier. Lucas tugged impatiently at her sleeve, eager to explore the next gallery. She was tired, but it was the pleasant kind of tired, the kind that came from a day spent doing something she loved. She stood, guiding her boys down the corridor toward the next room, unaware that her world was about to tilt in a way she hadn't expected in years. It started with a voice. Not a word, not a greeting, just a tone. A low, composed timbre that slid into her awareness like a memory brought to life. Familiar. Sharp. Inevitable. She froze mid-step, her heart stuttering painfully in her chest. She told herself it was impossible. He would never be here. He lived in a world of boardrooms and private jets, not quiet museum galleries overflowing with worn carpet and watercolor landscapes. But the footsteps followed, the sound of expensive shoes striking the floor with controlled confidence, the sound she used to hear approaching her from behind late at night when he returned from meetings. She closed her eyes, willing the sensation away, telling herself she was imagining it, until her sons tugged at her hands, pulling her forward. And then she saw him. Matthew stood beneath a massive oil landscape, framed by mountains painted in deep blues and grays. His brown hair was slightly longer than she remembered, swept back in a style that made him look both older and somehow gentler. His tailored coat contrasted sharply with the casual, wandering crowd, but it wasn't his clothing that rooted Evelyn to the floor. It was the expression on his face, open, unguarded shock, as his blue eyes locked onto her with a force that nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. He looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. Evelyn's throat tightened. Instinctively, she stepped sideways, shielding Lucas and Owen from view, though she knew it was already too late. Matthew's gaze dropped, drawn helplessly to the two small figures beside her. His expression shifted from disbelief to confusion, then to something deeper and infinitely more raw. The boys stared back at him with unabashed curiosity, their blue eyes, his eyes, studying the stranger who looked at them as though he were seeing ghosts. Lucas, ever fearless, tilted his head and whispered loudly, "Why is that man staring at us?" Owen pressed closer to Evelyn's leg, his small hand gripping her coat. She felt his tremble, and it grounded her even as her own knees threatened to give out. She forced her breath steady, her voice calm. "It's all right. Let's keep walking." But Matthew took a step forward, and the sound of it echoed through her like an unanswered question. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then paused, gathering himself with a visible effort. When he finally spoke, his voice was not the cold, clipped tone she remembered from that last day. It was unsteady. Fragile, even. Evelyn. Her name broke something inside her. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze with far more strength than she felt. Matthew. He looked at the boys again, unable to tear his eyes away. Lucas blinked up at him, confusion shifting to curiosity. Owen hid half behind his mother, peeking out with wide eyes. The resemblance was unmistakable, almost painful. Matthew's face drained of color as realization crept in, not slowly, but all at once, shattering through him like glass. His lips parted, trembling around a question he seemed terrified to ask. Are they? Evelyn didn't look away. She didn't soften the truth or cushion the blow. Yes. The single word struck him visibly. His breath hitched, and he took a step back as if he'd been physically pushed. His hand lifted slightly before he caught himself, unsure whether he had the right to reach for them. His eyes glistened with something Evelyn had never seen in him before, regret so intense it bordered on desperation. I didn't know, he whispered. You didn't want to know, she corrected, her voice calm but edged with years of buried hurt. He flinched, the past slicing between them. Around them, visitors continued moving through the gallery, unaware of the earthquake unfolding within a single small corner. The boys looked between the two adults, sensing tension they couldn't understand. Lucas tugged on Evelyn's hand, murmuring, Mama, can we go see the big mountain painting now? Evelyn swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on all of them. Yes, sweetheart, she said softly, turning slightly as if to leave. But before she could take a step, Owen, usually the shy one, looked up at Matthew with those bright blue eyes and asked in a tiny, curious voice, Why do you look like us? The question landed like a blow. Matthew's expression shattered completely. And Evelyn realized with a jolt that this moment, unwanted and unplanned, was not an ending. It was the beginning of a reckoning she had spent 4 years trying to outrun. Evelyn guided the boys toward a quieter corner of the gallery, her heartbeat still thrumming painfully in her ears as she tried to steady her breathing. She didn't look back at Matthew, not because she didn't feel his presence behind her, she did, acutely, like a shadow she thought she had finally escaped, but because she wasn't sure what she might see in his eyes if she did. Shock. Guilt. Recognition. Questions she wasn't ready to answer. The boys walked on either side of her, small hands gripping hers, unaware of how the air around them had thickened with the weight of past choices and the collision of two worlds she had kept fiercely separate for 4 long years. When they reached a bench near a quiet installation of soft watercolor landscapes, Evelyn lowered herself onto the seat, pulling Lucas and Owen close as if she could shield them with her own body from what was coming. But Matthew followed at a measured pace, each step deliberate, as though he feared that moving too quickly might cause everything to shatter further. He stopped a few feet away, breath uneven, hands trembling slightly at his sides. He looked at her first, then at the boys, and Evelyn saw him wrestling with emotions he had no practice containing. For once, the man who built empires with his confidence looked utterly lost. She kept her voice calm when she finally addressed him, though her insides felt raw. You don't belong here, Matthew. His eyes flickered with pain, but he didn't retreat. I know. But I couldn't walk away. Not after seeing them. His gaze dropped to the boys again, and Evelyn felt an involuntary pang in her chest at the sincerity in his expression. It wasn't possessive or demanding. It was disbelief tangled with a dawning awareness so strong it seemed to remake the shape of his face. Lucas, curious as always, leaned in slightly. Who is he, Mama? His blue eyes, too reminiscent of Matthew's, blinked up at her with trust. Owen clung to her sleeve, glancing nervously at the man whose features mirrored his own. Evelyn hesitated, because there was no easy answer, no way to unravel 4 years of silence in a single sentence. She looked at Matthew, silent but demanding he understand the gravity of this moment. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. He crouched to the boy's height, though he didn't move closer, keeping a respectful distance. "My name is Matthew," he said softly. "Anne. I think I owe you both a very big apology." The twins exchanged confused glances. Evelyn's chest tightened. Part of her wanted to pull them away, to end this before it could dig into the parts of her heart she had spent years repairing. Another part knew she couldn't shield them forever. Matthew slowly sank onto the bench beside them, though he left enough space that Evelyn could feel his restraint. He faced her now, not the boys, and the intensity of his gaze nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. "I need to say something to you first." She braced herself. "Make it quick." He nodded, absorbing the sharpness in her tone as something he deserved. "That day in my office. I said something unforgivable. I didn't care. I refused to listen. I pushed you away." His voice cracked, surprising them both. "I've replayed that moment in my head more times than I can count, and I always thought I was the only one who had to live with the consequences of my decisions. But I was wrong. I didn't just lose you that day." His eyes flickered toward the twins. "I lost them too. I just didn't realize it until it was too late." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She wasn't ready to give him comfort. Not yet. Maybe never. But she couldn't deny that something in his voice shook her. Matthew turned to the boys then, his expression softening into something she had never seen from him before, a mix of awe, fear, and yearning. "Can I ask your names?" he murmured. Lucas puffed out his chest proudly. "I'm Lucas. This is Owen. We're 4. Owen nodded solemnly, leaning into his brother. Matthew's lips trembled with an almost painful smile. "4," he repeated quietly, as if the word wounded him. "I missed so much." Evelyn felt her composure falter, just for a moment. She hadn't expected him to acknowledge the lost years so plainly. Most men like him hid behind pride or denial. But Matthew looked like someone who had been stripped bare of both. Lucas climbed onto the bench and studied his face with unfiltered boldness. "Why do you look sad?" The question pierced the silence like a pin through thin glass. Matthew let out a breath that sounded more like a confession. "Because I've made mistakes I can't undo." Owen's brow furrowed in childlike confusion. "Did you break something?" Matthew's laugh was soft, hollow. "Yes," he whispered. "I broke something very important." He looked at Evelyn again, and this time she couldn't look away fast enough. The vulnerability in his gaze hit too deep, reaching parts of her she thought had healed cleanly. She stood abruptly, needing the distance to breathe. "This isn't the place for this conversation." He rose as well, but he didn't chase her. Instead he nodded slowly. "You're right. But, please, don't shut me out before I have a chance to try." Evelyn felt anger spark again, not the explosive kind of 4 years ago, but a tired, aching frustration born from all the nights she spent alone with 2 crying infants and no one to lean on. "You had your chance," she said quietly. "You threw it away." His blue eyes shimmered with remorse. "Then let me earn a new one." The boys tugged at her hands then, asking if they could go see the interactive light display. She nodded, grateful for the distraction. As she turned away, she felt Matthew watching them with an expression that blended heartbreak and fierce determination. For the first time, Evelyn realized that he wasn't leaving this time. And whether she wanted it or not, the past she had tried so hard to bury had begun to rise. Matthew returned to the museum the next morning, though Evelyn had given him no promise, no encouragement, not even a hint that she wanted to see him again. Yet he appeared as though drawn by something stronger than decision, stronger than pride. He stood in the entrance hall awkwardly, so unlike the confident CEO she once knew, holding a small paper bag as if it were a fragile object that might crumble in his hands. When he saw Evelyn guiding the boys toward the children's workshop area, his breath hitched visibly. For a moment he seemed rooted to the floor, unsure whether he had the right to approach. Then Lucas spotted him and waved exuberantly, and Matthew's expression softened with a mix of relief and bewildered joy that made Evelyn's chest tighten unexpectedly. She braced herself as he approached, preparing for excuses or declarations or something painfully complicated. But instead he crouched beside the boys, opening the small paper bag and revealing 2 miniature sketchbooks with bright covers and matching sets of crayons. "I thought you might like these," he said quietly, offering the gifts as though they were peace offerings presented at the edge of a battlefield. The twins' faces lit up instantly, their earlier apprehension dissolving beneath pure excitement. Lucas tore into his sketchbook and immediately began drawing something that looked like a dinosaur wearing a hat. Owen, more careful, traced the edges of the paper before making his first small mark. Evelyn exhaled slowly, confusion and caution twisting together inside her. She had expected Matthew to stumble, to withdraw, to behave as he once had, cold, distant, unreachable. Instead he sat with the boys on the museum floor, listening to their rambling stories with a patience she didn't know he possessed. He asked questions, nodded at their nonsensical answers, and seemed genuinely enthralled by the chaotic imagination of 2 4-year-olds. He was clumsy with the crayons, drawing a lopsided cat that instantly became the boys' favorite picture simply because he had made it. Watching him, Evelyn felt her heart ache with a strange mixture of emotions, pain from the years he missed, anger for the choices he made, and a slow-burning disbelief at the man he seemed to be now. During her lunch break, she found him waiting near the cafe seating area, not imposing, not invading her space, just waiting. The boys climbed immediately into the chairs beside him as if he had been part of their routine all along. Evelyn sat across from them, arms folded, studying him with careful restraint. He didn't rush into explanation this time. Instead he helped Owen unwrap his sandwich, poured water into their small cups, and smiled when Lucas proudly presented the chaotic scribble he'd titled Rocket Dinosaur. The ease with which he engaged with them unsettled her, because he wasn't performing. He wasn't pretending. It was genuine. After the boys grew absorbed in their food, Matthew finally looked at Evelyn with an expression that held apology and longing and something deeper she didn't want to name. "I'm not here to disrupt your life," he said quietly. "I just want to show you I'm not the man I was." She felt her walls rise instinctively. "People don't change overnight," she replied. "And some things can't be undone." He nodded slowly, accepting the sting of her words without attempting to defend himself. "I know. And that's why I'm not asking for forgiveness today. Or tomorrow. Or anytime soon. I'm just trying to be present. For them." He glanced at the boys, who were now giggling over Matthew's attempt at drawing a second cat. "For you, if you'll allow it." Evelyn looked away, unwilling to let him see how much those words affected her. She wasn't ready to believe him. But she couldn't deny that his presence brought a strange stability, not chaos. Instead of reopening wounds, it made her question whether some of them had ever fully healed. Later that afternoon, the boys insisted that Matthew join them for the interactive light exhibit. Evelyn expected him to decline or to stand at a distance, but he entered the room with them, letting the shifting patterns of light wash over his suit as he knelt beside Lucas, who was trying to catch the glowing shapes on the floor. Owen tugged at his sleeve, guiding him toward the wall of swirling colors. Matthew followed with a small, astonished smile as though experiencing something he had never allowed himself to enjoy. Evelyn lingered near the doorway, watching them through a trembling curtain of emotions she struggled to untangle. Matthew lifted Owen into his arms so he could press a glowing handprint against the wall, and the boys' delighted laughter echoed through the room. Lucas grabbed Matthew by the hand and pulled him toward the brightest section of the exhibit, chattering excitedly about how he wanted to become a light scientist. Matthew listened with such focused sincerity that it made Evelyn's breath catch. This was not the man who had once dismissed her. This was someone learning how to be present, how to care, how to show up in ways she never imagined possible. But that realization brought fear just as quickly as hope. If she let herself believe in this version of him, she risked reopening a door she had slammed shut to survive. She risked her heart. She risked the stability she had built for the boys. When the exhibit ended and the lights faded back to their normal glow, Lucas and Owen clung to Matthew's hands, refusing to let go. He crouched down and looked them in the eyes. "I'll be here tomorrow," he promised softly. "If you want me to be." They nodded vigorously, and Evelyn felt her breath shake. She watched him stand, watched him turn to her with that new, unfamiliar tenderness that both warmed and terrified her, watched him walk toward the exit with a slow, uncertain hope in every step. As she gathered her sons in her arms, she felt the air shift around her, heavier, fuller, charged with a future she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Because Matthew wasn't leaving. Not this time. And she no longer knew whether she wanted him to. Matthew kept coming back to the museum, not with the polished assurance he once carried like a second skin, but with a quiet persistence that made Evelyn feel unsteady every time she saw him. He never assumed she wanted him there, never acted as though he had earned a place in their routine. Instead, he lingered just close enough for the boys to spot him and just far enough that Evelyn could send him away with a single look if she chose to. But she didn't. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the way Lucas and Owen lit up the moment they saw him. Or maybe it was the part of her she had spent years burying, the part that recognized something in him she had never seen before, vulnerability. In the mornings he arrived with a thermos of tea, though he never handed it to her directly. He left it on a nearby bench, pretending it was for himself, but he always walked away without taking it. She never thanked him, but she drank it anyway. In the afternoons he read to the boys in the children's corner, stumbling over silly rhymes and laughing with them when he mispronounced the names of imaginary creatures. Evening sometimes found him in the sculpture garden, sitting quietly while the twins played tag between marble figures. Evelyn watched him from a distance, noticing how he looked at the boys, not with guilt alone, not with fear alone, but with a reverence that seemed to deepen each day, as though he was still trying to comprehend that two small lives existed because of him and despite him. One especially warm afternoon, she decided to take the boys to the museum courtyard, a rare patch of sunlight surrounded by glass walls that reflected the sky like a fractured mirror. The boys ran ahead, chasing each other in circles, their laughter bouncing off the stone. Evelyn leaned against a low railing, letting herself breathe in the quiet between their shouts. She didn't notice Matthew at first. He approached slowly, as if afraid to startle her, holding nothing this time, no gifts, no excuses, just his own unsure presence. She didn't send him away. She simply glanced toward a patch of shade, silently granting permission. He took the cue and lowered himself onto the bench beneath the lone tree. For a long while they didn't speak. The boys continued racing each other, Lucas yelling instructions for imaginary missions while Owen trailed behind, more cautious but equally determined. Matthew watched them with a softness Evelyn wasn't prepared for. His elbows rested on his knees, hands clasped loosely, posture relaxed in a way she had never seen during the years she worked for him. Eventually he broke the silence, his voice quiet enough that she had to tilt her head to hear him. "I've spent the last 4 years convincing myself I didn't make a mistake," he said. "And every day since I saw them, I've realized I've been lying to myself." Evelyn stiffened, but he continued before she could speak. "I thought success meant keeping people at a distance. I thought emotions were dangers I couldn't afford. My parents raised me to believe attachment made you weak, that family was a distraction, that love was inconvenient." He let out a humorless breath. I spent my entire life becoming the kind of man who doesn't need anyone. And it turns out I became someone my own children couldn't rely on." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the railing. She didn't want to pity him. She didn't want to soften. But his honesty pressed into her like a slow, insistent ache. "You made choices," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Choices that left us alone. Choices that hurt." He nodded without defending himself. "I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect them to, someday." He looked down at his hands, almost ashamed. "But I want to be better. Not for myself. For them. They deserve more than a father who showed up too late." Before Evelyn could reply, Lucas tripped over a loose stone. Owen gasped, running to his brother as Lucas sat up with a trembling lip, blinking back tears he didn't want to shed. Evelyn was already stepping forward, but Matthew reached him first with a speed born of pure instinct. He knelt beside the boy, checking his scraped knee, whispering something too soft for Evelyn to hear. Lucas sniffed, his little chest heaving, and then, unexpectedly, leaned forward, letting Matthew lift him with gentle arms. It was the first time either of the boys had allowed him to hold them, and the sight hit Evelyn like a punch to the ribs. Matthew didn't look proud. He didn't look triumphant. He looked undone. Owen hovered close, watching anxiously as Matthew carried Lucas to the bench. Evelyn joined them, kneeling to inspect the scrape. It was minor, but Lucas milked the moment for all it was worth, insisting it hurt like a dragon bite. Matthew chuckled softly. "Well, that just means you're braver than a dragon." Lucas beamed through his sniffles, leaning comfortably against his shoulder. Evelyn didn't miss how Matthew's hands trembled slightly around the small body he held, or how carefully he steadied himself as though terrified of doing something wrong. Owen eventually climbed onto the bench too, pressing against Matthew's other side with shy curiosity. And just like that, the three of them sat together, forming an image Evelyn never imagined would exist, a scene that felt tender and fragile and impossibly real. She watched them for a moment, letting the warmth settle beneath her ribs despite herself. Finally she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "They're not the only ones who need consistency." Matthew looked up, hope and fear blending in his expression. "I know." She met his gaze without looking away. "If you want to be in their lives, you have to show up. Not for a week. Not for a month. You have to show up every time." He nodded slowly, conviction anchoring every word. "I will. For as long as you'll let me." Evelyn didn't answer him directly, because she wasn't ready, and he seemed to understand that. Instead she stood, brushing off her knees, and called for the boys to gather their things. Matthew rose carefully, setting Lucas back on his feet as though handing him something priceless and fragile. As they walked back into the museum together, Matthew a step behind her, the boys orbiting them with excited chatter, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her life had shifted. Not broken. Not cracked. Shifted. And for the first time in 4 years, the shift didn't terrify her. It frightened her. But it also made her wonder. Wonder if the past she survived might not be the only story she and her children would ever know. Wonder if a man could truly change. Wonder if the future she had fought so fiercely to protect might have room for someone she never expected to see again. Evelyn could feel a gradual, undeniable shift settling into her days, something subtle enough that she might have ignored it if it weren't for the unmistakable way Lucas and Owen now looked for Matthew the moment they entered the museum. Where once their world consisted solely of her, the gallery rooms, and each other, a new shape had formed in their small constellation, one they gravitated toward with a mixture of excitement and comfort. And Matthew came, every time, not with the self-assured stride of a man who believed he deserved a place there, but with the cautious hope of someone afraid of breaking something fragile. Evelyn told herself not to read too much into it. People could pretend. People could try for a while, then grow bored. People could say all the right things and still walk away when it mattered. But as the days stretched into weeks, she found herself watching for cracks and finding fewer than she expected. One quiet morning, she arrived at the museum early for her shift, the twins sleepy but cheerful as they clung to her hands. The halls were empty, washed in soft lighting that made every painting seem to breathe. As they turned the corner toward the children's program area, she stopped short. Matthew was already there. Not waiting idly. Not pacing nervously. He was kneeling on the floor surrounded by an array of small wooden blocks he'd clearly arranged into some kind of elaborate structure. Lucas gasped with delight, immediately running toward it. Owen followed more slowly but with clear intrigue. Matthew looked up at Evelyn, offering a small, tentative smile before shifting his attention fully to the boys. "I thought we could build something together today," he said gently. "If that's all right." Lucas had already plopped down beside him, digging his hands into the pile of blocks. Owen sat next to them and began lining up pieces with meticulous concentration. Evelyn found herself watching the three of them from a distance, arms folded loosely, heart unexpectedly warm. Matthew wasn't forcing anything, he wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply being present, letting the boys lead, responding to their questions with patience and genuine curiosity. It was a kind of softness she had never seen from him, a softness she didn't know he was capable of. Later that afternoon, after her shift ended, she found him sitting with the twins beneath a large installation piece, an enormous suspended sculpture that cast shifting patterns of shadow across the floor. Matthew had the boys completely engrossed in an animated explanation about how shadows change shape depending on the angle of light. Lucas attempted to mimic the shapes with his arms while Owen tried creating animals on the wall with his hands. Their laughter echoed in a way that made Evelyn's chest tighten with a confusing mix of gratitude and fear. She stood at the edge of the space, listening as Matthew gently corrected Lucas's enthusiastic but impossible explanation about shadow dinosaurs. When he noticed her watching, he didn't straighten proudly or attempt to impress her. Instead, his expression softened into something almost shy, a look she had never imagined seeing on his face. That evening, when she gathered the boys' coats and prepared to leave, Matthew walked beside her, his steps measured, his hands tucked into his pockets as though afraid to impose. The boys raced ahead of them toward the exit, their small voices echoing through the hall. Evelyn sensed that Matthew was working up to something, and she steeled herself for whatever question might come. "I've been trying to understand how you did it," he said quietly, surprising her. She glanced at him, unsure what he meant. "Raising them alone. I can't wrap my head around how much strength that must have taken." His voice held no pity, only reverence, which somehow struck her deeper. "I didn't have a choice," she replied, but softer than she intended. "When you're a parent, you don't get to choose whether you're strong. You learn because you have to." Matthew nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "I wish I had learned sooner." "Wishing doesn't change anything," she said. "But growing does." His gaze met hers briefly with something earnest, almost vulnerable. "I am trying to grow, Evelyn. Not for you. Not even for myself. For them." She believed him. It scared her how much she believed him. That weekend, the museum hosted a family art event, and although she didn't invite him, she wasn't surprised when Matthew showed up. What surprised her was how prepared he was. He arrived carrying a small folding table he had bought specifically for the twins' height, 2 smocks she had mentioned in passing weeks ago, and a pack of finger paints labeled "washable" in large letters, clearly chosen after careful research. Lucas and Owen bolted straight to him, ecstatic. And this time, Evelyn didn't try to stop them. The event turned chaotic in the best way. Children shrieked with glee as they smeared colors across paper, parents attempted to control the mess with limited success, museum staff directed traffic like overwhelmed lifeguards in a pool full of toddlers armed with paintbrushes. Evelyn moved through the room helping families, glancing occasionally toward where Matthew sat between the twins, guiding their small hands through swirling patterns of color. His suit jacket was draped neatly over a chair, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, forearms streaked with bright green and blue. He didn't seem to notice the mess. Or he noticed and didn't care. At one point Lucas smeared a thick line of yellow paint across Matthew's cheek. Evelyn held her breath, waiting for irritation or discomfort. Instead Matthew laughed, a full, unguarded laugh she had never heard from him before, and retaliated by giving Lucas a tiny blue dot on the nose. Owen squealed in delight, demanding a matching dot. And then, unexpectedly, he reached toward Matthew's face with a careful hand and pressed a small, hesitant kiss to his paint-streaked cheek. Matthew froze. The entire room kept moving, but for him, everything stopped. Evelyn saw it, saw the way the moment pierced him, saw the devastation and wonder and gratitude collide inside his expression. He didn't lift a hand to wipe the paint away. He didn't speak. He simply let himself feel the weight of that tiny, innocent gesture. Later, as she helped the boys wash their hands at the sink, Matthew stood beside them, still quiet, still processing. When the water turned off and the twins scampered ahead toward the exit, Evelyn found herself alone with him for the first time that day. "That was the first time he's ever done that," she said softly. "Owen doesn't warm up easily." Matthew swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "I don't deserve it. But I'm grateful for it." His voice cracked, just barely. Evelyn looked at him then, not the man he had been, but the one he was becoming. A man who was learning to love, learning to show up, learning to kneel on paint-covered floors and let a child mark his face without complaint. A man she wasn't sure she could trust yet. A man she wasn't sure she could dismiss anymore either. As they walked out of the museum that evening, Lucas perched on her hip, Owen gripping Matthew's hand, the air felt different. Fuller. Warmer. Charged with possibility she wasn't ready to name. A possibility she couldn't ignore. Because somewhere between regret and redemption, something fragile had begun to grow. And Evelyn wasn't sure whether it frightened her more that she felt it, or that she wanted to. The summer exhibition had drawn one of the largest museum crowds of the year, filling the hallways with a soft buzz of conversation that rose and fell like waves. Evelyn moved through the galleries with practiced grace, guiding guests, answering questions, and glancing every so often toward the twins, who were now so comfortable in the museum that the staff jokingly referred to them as junior curators. Lucas and Owen darted between installations, pausing occasionally to show Evelyn their discoveries before sprinting off again. She felt peaceful in a way she hadn't known for years, though she refused to examine the reasons too closely. Perhaps it was simply that life had found a rhythm she could finally breathe in. Or perhaps it had something to do with the man moving quietly in their orbit, learning how to fit into the spaces he once left empty. Matthew arrived that afternoon wearing jeans and a soft gray t-shirt instead of his usual crisp suits, a change subtle enough that most visitors didn't notice, but significant enough that Evelyn did. He looked younger like this. More approachable. More human. She watched as he knelt beside the twins, listening intently as Lucas explained an abstract sculpture with exaggerated gestures and absolute confidence despite being entirely wrong. Owen held onto Matthew's shoulder, tracing gentle patterns on the fabric of his shirt as though anchoring himself there. The sight hit her with an unexpected warmth that made her chest tighten. When the crowd began to thin, the museum prepared for the evening's main event, a light installation set to music, visible from both inside the gallery and the outdoor reflection courtyard. Families gathered near the giant windows, children pressed their faces to the glass, and the soft hum of excitement filled the space. Evelyn planned to watch from the back of the room, giving the boys space to enjoy the spectacle, but the twins had other plans. Lucas grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. Owen grabbed Matthew's, tugging in synchrony with his brother, and just like that, the four of them were drawn together into the soft glow of the exhibition hall. They found a quiet spot near the wall where the lights reflected in wave-like patterns. Evelyn settled onto the floor, and the twins climbed into her lap before immediately shifting to sit between her and Matthew, as if refusing to choose sides. She felt Matthew's shoulder brush hers, and though the contact was brief and accidental, it sent a tremor through her she hadn't expected. The lights dimmed slightly, the first notes of music drifted through the speakers, and the installation awakened in a cascade of color that washed across the gallery like falling stars. Owen gasped softly, leaning into Matthew as the lights shifted, and Lucas reached out as if trying to catch the colors with his fingertips. For a long while they simply watched, the four of them cocooned in a quiet moment that felt suspended outside of time. Evelyn felt the steady rise and fall of her son's breaths, the faint warmth radiating from Matthew beside her, and an ache inside her chest that was no longer sharp but surprisingly gentle. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. When the installation ended, applause filled the gallery. The twins clapped wildly, grinning at each other, while Matthew looked at them with a mix of awe and something deeper, something like love. It unsettled Evelyn, but in a way that made her pulse quicken rather than her guard rise. The boys quickly returned to exploring the gallery, leaving Evelyn and Matthew momentarily alone. He shifted closer, not enough to crowd her, but enough that she could sense his hesitation. "I want to ask you something," he said softly. "And you don't owe me an answer tonight." She looked at him warily, but nodded for him to continue. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair as though searching for the right words. "These weeks with them, and with you, they've changed everything for me. I know I can't erase the past. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want, no, I need, to build a future where I can be part of their lives in a real, lasting way. Not just a guest. Not just someone who shows up at the museum. I want to be their father. And maybe, someday, if it's possible, someone you can trust again." Evelyn's breath caught. His words landed quietly but with a force that rippled through her carefully constructed barriers. She stared at him, searching for any trace of the man who once pushed her away with cold indifference. But all she saw was honesty, raw and unguarded, shaped by weeks of humility and effort. She swallowed hard, fighting the sting of emotion in her throat. "I can't give you an answer yet," she said, her voice low but steady. "I'm not ready. They are still young. And I need time to understand what this means for all of us." Matthew nodded immediately, almost in relief. "Time is something I'm willing to give." Before she could respond, the museum lights flickered, once, twice, before stabilizing again. A staff announcement echoed through the hall, informing visitors that Gallery 9 had temporarily lost power and would be closed until lighting was restored. Evelyn's heart stopped. Lucas and Owen had wandered toward Gallery 9 not long ago. Without a word, she sprinted down the hall, Matthew right behind her. The gallery was darker than the others, illuminated only by faint emergency strips along the floor. "Lucas! Owen!" Evelyn called, fear tightening her voice. Matthew moved faster than she expected, scanning the room with sharp precision. Then, from behind one of the sculptures, two small voices answered in unison, "Mama." "Daddy." "We're here." Everything froze. Evelyn felt the world tilt as the word hung in the air, trembling with meaning. "Daddy." The first time they had ever said it. Matthew reached the boys first, pulling them into his arms as though he feared they might disappear. Tears sprang into his eyes, not dramatic, not loud, just real. Owen pressed his face into Matthew's neck. Lucas wrapped his arms around him fiercely. Evelyn stood motionless, watching the man who once said he didn't care hold the children he clearly loved now more than anything he owned. She approached slowly, heart thundering. Lucas turned to her, tugging at her hand, urging her closer. When she reached them, Matthew lifted his gaze to hers, and the expression in his eyes made her breath falter. Gratitude. Fear. Hope. Love, not the careless, reckless kind she once dreamed about, but something steadier, earned, alive. Before she could speak, Owen pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Matthew. It was a drawing, crooked and messy, but unmistakable. 4 figures holding hands. And over the tallest figure, in shaky letters, Owen had written, "Daddy." Matthew's voice cracked. "I don't deserve this." "Maybe not yet," Evelyn whispered. "But you're trying. And they see it." He looked at her again, something shifting deep behind his blue eyes. "Do you?" She hesitated, only a second, but in that second, something inside her loosened. "I'm beginning to," she said softly. And for the first time since the day she walked out of his office 4 years ago, she wasn't speaking from pain. She was speaking from possibility.